textual criticism, apparatuses, and Bible study. And tonight we're going to introduce you to this amazing topic. And I found this really good quote that I thought would be a great way to start the webinar. Textual criticism is not an exact science. It deals in the realm of probability, not certainty. And we're going to begin to explain what all this means, but I wanted to put this out there. So let's get started by opening up the personal book right away and begin to get some important information. Now, one of the things I like to do with every webinar is provide you with some recommended resources. And in this particular topic, these resources are absolutely not only crucial, but really helpful in getting you the knowledge to understand this topic even more in depth than I can. So let me walk you through the handful of these resources, because once you see these resources, I think you're going to appreciate knowing that you can get them in Logos Bible software. So let's go with the first one by David Allen Black, New Testament Textual Criticism, a Concise Guide. Now, when he says concise guide, what he means is very concise. We're talking roughly, I think this thing is not more than, 75 pages. Very concise, and that's with the glossary and the subject index. And so what he's going to do is introduce you to what when we talk about textual criticism, what are the components? Well, the first component is going to be the materials, the papyruses, the scrolls, all those things. And then there's going to be a discussion on how we went from the original autographs to the text that we have today, and how some texts did get corrupted. In other words, there were copying errors in them, and then how we in the last couple hundred years have gone through a process called textual criticism to restore the text, to get us to as close as possible to the original autograph. And when I say original autograph, I mean the actual scroll, papyrus, or even skin or whatever that the biblical writer wrote on. Now, we may have a piece of Paul's letters, the original with his handwriting, but we don't know anymore if that was his or someone else's. So the purpose of textual criticism is to restore the text so that the text we're reading reflects what the original author wrote. And there are some rules and principles and things to guide you through that process. Now, this is typically the work for the scholar. They're the ones who go into these museums, they find these papyruses and scrolls, or they go online now, and we'll show you some websites that can do that. And they actually are looking and reading and seeing if they can improve the text and get a better reading. And that's what this purpose of this resource is, just to introduce you to the concept. In fact, what I like about it is, for example, this appendix at the back, types of errors. Now, let me stress, because this topic can scare people to death, okay? Now, when I say errors, I don't mean that the Bible you have is not trustworthy. It absolutely is trustworthy. What we're talking about is the Greek and Hebrew texts that have been copied over the years, and there's been copying errors, copying mistakes. And here's some examples of these. Some are faulty word division. For example, we acknowledge how great or confessedly great. And if you actually were to look at the Greek, you can see, for example, that the word division is a little different. There's a little OS here that's been added and connected to the first Greek word, where here it's 3 Greek words. And so there was just a word division. Easy things to make a mistake on, but we can discern what it is. Then we have words with similar ending or single writing, double writing, where they write the word twice. There's changing the place of words. There's confusing vowel sounds that can happen. And there's some other things like intentional errors, where they try to improve the grammar, or they tried to harmonize it with a parallel passage, so they duplicated the text when they shouldn't have. Sometimes there's conflation, where they combine 2 or more variants into one reading. And very, very rarely is there doctrinal changes. I need to stress this right at the beginning. This is such an important concept. There are literally thousands of New Testament manuscripts. There's lots of Old Testament manuscripts. And in all the copies that we have, not any of them affects any major doctrines in the Old or New Testament. In other words, as many copies that we have and as many errors that we have, these are all easily resolvable. And the good news is it doesn't really change the nature of the text. In fact, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, which predated all copies of the Old Testament by almost 1,000 years, we discovered that the textual criticism that went through the process of reconstructing the Hebrew Old Testament was very accurate and nearly matched the Dead Sea Scrolls. In other words, all that to say, we can trust our Bibles. Very, very important. So if you want to learn more about New Testament criticism, this is a great starting place. Now, the next book by Wendy Witter, Textual Criticism, is really a neat resource because it's an introductory resource, but it has these wonderful PowerPoints that really highlight some of the key ideas in the text, okay? And so here's an example. Translation options for Isaiah 19:16. In the day the Egyptians will become like women, will be as weak as women, will become weaklings, will be like historical schoolgirls. Now you can see all these translations, they got the NAS, the New Living, the NIV, and the Message. And so textual criticism is going to help us deal with the underlying language. And so this gives you some background on variety of translations and so forth. So very neat little resource. Again, PowerPoints all the way through the text. Breaks it down into the New Testament, the Old Testament. I just think this is a wonderful must-have resource as well. One of the things I do like at the back of the book is textual criticism and English translations. So you can find out the underlying manuscript that is guiding that translation. So for example, King James is based on the Textus Receptus, or the Byzantine or majority text, whereas the New American Standard is based on the Nestle-Aland. So this can help you understand where they're coming from. And this is also going to explain why, when you run the Compare Bible Version tool, why some translations are more similar or dissimilar, or why they group together or don't group together. So that's a real handy section in the book there to help you understand the source of these translations. Now this third one, A Student's Guide to Textual Criticism of Bible, its history, method, and results. This is a little more academic, and it's a lot longer. I believe it's almost 300 pages. Now what I like about this is it goes into a much more comprehensive, in-depth study in what is textual criticism. So it goes into some of the background. Again, what is textual criticism? What are the type of errors you're expecting to see? How was the Bible transmitted? Then there's a whole section just on the Old Testament and a whole section on the New Testament. Now what makes this really neat, and this is what I like this book, is it now tells you what manuscripts we have that contribute to our understanding of the New Testament and Old Testament texts. And they're also listed in order chronologically. So Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest ones we have. Then we have the Greek Septuagint. And then we have a unified text by the 1st century. Then we talk about Origen's Hexapla. Then the Latin Vulgate and the Masoretes. And then we have printed Bibles, polyglot Bibles, Hebrew editions with textual apparatuses, and so forth in our modern day. And the same thing with the New Testament. We can see different authors and how they contributed and so forth. So looking and understanding these various texts can help us really understand the time that these copies were made and where they should fit in the process of determining what is the true historical biblical text, which one is closest to what the author actually wrote down. So wonderful, wonderful, helpful tool there. By the way, chapter 9 gets into some really good detail here. Gives you some background on the Chester Beatty collection. It talks about the various, what they call uncials texts, and that's this is what it looks like. Here's the Codex Vaticanus. It's known to exist in the Catholic Church since the late 1400s, but it may even go back older than that. And so you can see some examples here, all capital letters and these column formats. Here's the Codex Alexandrinus. Most of these images are available online now, and that can be pretty helpful too, to find these images online. Here's a minuscule manuscript, and you can see how it's a little bit different than the previous manuscripts. And so these are pretty neat. Okay, the next resource is Brotzmann, Old Testament criticism. So this focuses exclusively on the Old Testament. Here you're going to get a lot of great detail. What you may not realize, and this is kind of an interesting topic, is that we believe that the original Bible that Moses wrote, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, was probably written in Phoenician script. And then later, through time, it was written in the script that we have today, the square Aramaic script. And so here's an example they call it Paleo Hebrew. Here's a good example of the Paleo Hebrew versus the square script that we have today. So Moses most likely wrote in this above language. What we have today through time is the bottom language. So just be aware of that, but there'll be much more greater detail in the Dead Sea Scrolls, what kind of errors you can expect to see in the Old Testament. For example, Numbers is one of the more difficult challenges in the Old Testament. Now, in the New Testament, there's several you need to be aware of. This next one is George Eldon Ladd. This is a pretty simple book. It's only a couple hundred pages, and this comes out of the late 60s. And he just breaks it down on some key questions. So it's pretty much a book format, a lot of text. You're not going to see a lot of images here. But he does go through in the various types of criticism, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And so he's going to explain the various types. So just to give you a list here, there's criticism in general, which again is trying to understand what the text is saying. What is the source of the text, and what should be written down? Then you get into linguistic criticism, literary criticism, form criticism, historical criticism. So be aware that there are different flavors, and we'll hit a few of those in a little bit. Then we have the Westcott and Hort. Now, this is an older book, 1882. Many of the King James only. So if you're a big fan of King James, Westcott and Hort is perceived as the enemy of the King James. And so back in the 1880s, these guys took the more recent manuscripts that have been discovered, because when the King James was written in the 1600s, they had a limited selection of Greek manuscripts. Well, over the next several hundred years, many more manuscripts were found. And so Westcott and Hort began to organize those manuscripts and said, you know what, it's time to revise the Bible a little bit. And of course, you make a change after 300 years, there's going to be some opposition to that. But what's helpful about this book is you begin to understand the history and the need and why they did what they did. Whether you're a King James only fan or not, this book is essential to understand how these guys came to make the decisions they did to create a new edition of the Greek manuscript, which then would have further impact on English translations. So very important historical book to be aware of. And then the next one, which is pretty neat, is Textual Variants Collection. You can see that this product does not contain the online manuscript feature from Logos 6. To get the complete textual variants tool, which we'll show you in a little bit, you need to upgrade to Logos 6 Gold or higher. And this will give you a little video on it. And I do cover this in the Logos 6 training too, but this collection will give you a whole bunch of resources. So you do get some of these fragments and things like that, and we'll take a look at some of those in a little bit. All right, now let's find out some more information that might be helpful for you. Turns out that in many of your surveys, introductions, and handbooks, there are extra information, short chapters on this topic of textual criticism. So here's the rule name. Let me go ahead and open up the rule, Tools Collection. So let's create this rule together, Tools Collections, and let me make room over here for it. Now, what I want you to do next is we're going to do a specialized search. So once you create that collection, or if you want, just search your whole library.